Welcome to the Sherpa Chalet on Mount Podcastia, where it's time for podcast picks with Jim the Podcast Sherpa. You'll get to hear about podcast recommendations for your podcast playlist, along with occasional interviews with other podcasters and video hosts. Now waiting for you is your host, Jim the Podcast Sherpa. He's just like you imagined. But don't worry, we'll make it up to you somehow.
This week on Podcast Picks with Jim, the Podcast Sherpa, it's a Sherpa Samples episode, complete with suggestions for your podcast playlist. All brought to you courtesy of our highly capable Sherpa. Well, not highly capable. More like I'm 20 paper clips richer because I made it sound convincing. Never mind. On with the show.
Welcome to the Sherpa's Podcast Picks. It's the podcast about, podcasts. And now, coming to you from Mount Podcastia, here's your host who wonders what's on your podcast playlist, Jim, the Podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, rebels of the Sherpa-lution, and welcome to Podcast Picks with Jim the Podcast Sherpa. That's me, this guy, right over here behind the mic, coming to you from Sherpa-lu Studios, here in the Sherpa Chalet, high atop Mount Podcastia, where I overlook the millions and millions of podcasts that are out there. And this week, I will be discussing 10 of them that I've checked out. Yep, it's a Sherpa Samples episode. So if you are looking to add some things to your podcast playlist, you've come to the right episode. Welcome, I say, welcome, with arms wide open, he said. And if you're new to the show, we do this every once in a while. We like to stay on top of what's on the podcast charts and throughout those charts as well. And that's where I've got a bunch of these. So I got to check them out. I really don't review them. I do just check them out to kind of let you know what they're all about. And sometimes I do throw my opinion in there if there's something that really might be bothering me or something that I really enjoy about the podcast. I will share that with you. But again, it's only my opinion. I'm not the podcast maven that you think I am. I'm just trying to be a helpful hand. That's why I'm your Sherpa, right? Yeah, that works. Anyway, why don't we head on into Sherpa Samples? The rebels, I can say, well, I'm recording this at this time. The weather on Mount Podcastia is quite cold. We are in the winter season, and although the weather outside is frightful, some of these podcasts are actually delightful. Okay, I better not say anymore because I might get sued for some sort of copyright infringement. Spotify, you're listening, right? Yeah, we'll find about it. Never mind. Okay, let's move on, shall we? So the first one I checked out was something called Unblinded, and it is hosted by an entrepreneur named Sean Callegy. And he's a really interesting guy. He's led an interesting life as a successful businessman, and he talks to other successful people as well. Sean was blind from birth, and he's really gone far in his life in spite of his blindness. In the episode, he has an interview with Magic Johnson, and I didn't really know that much about Magic Johnson, but it was a really interesting talk. They definitely had a lot of fun, too, and it wasn't just like sports talk, just to get to know the man. Really fascinating stuff. But if you like to hear podcasts interviewing successful people, this is one that you definitely want to check out. Beth said it is hosted by a lady named Monica Padman. And if her name sounds familiar, she is one of the hosts of the Armchair Expert podcast. That's the one that Dax Shepard hosts. This is really unusual too. And she explains the reason why she did this podcast, because there was a podcast that she liked, and the host of that podcast stopped doing the show after one of their fans was murdered. And it goes into the death of the fan. Funky Friday with Cam Newton. Cam Newton is from Carolina Panthers. And I didn't know he had a podcast, but it's really interesting. He's a good interviewer. His guest was a lady named Lola Brooke. And I guess she was a rapper. I don't really know too much about her. You guys might know a little bit more about her than I do. But again, a really good interviewer, surprising for a guy who probably talked football most of his life, but a really interesting podcast to check out. And he talks about all sorts of pop culture things on his podcast. Tiger Sisters is a podcast with two sisters. Their names are Sherry and Jean. And And again, both very successful academically and in the business world. And they talk about a lot of different topics on their podcast as well. They're not tigers, and their last name isn't Tiger, but I guess there's some sort of symbolism in them being called Tiger Sisters. But again, two intelligent ladies having a lot of really intelligent conversations. Probably a lot more than what happens when you're listening to me do this podcast. TRIGGERNOMETRY, it is brought to us by a few men over in the UK. It is largely a discussion about politics. And that was the episode that I checked out. They talked about a lot of political events from 2025. I listened to one a little while ago. And really, two very bright men. I couldn't really tell what was their political standing, but it was definitely a really cool presentation. The Meateater Podcast is hosted by a guy named Stephen Ranella. This was another one that was one of those pleasant surprises because it's about like hunting and fishing and things in the great outdoors. The episodes that I checked out, it was a discussion with, I think, a number of chefs about how they prepare their food and really what goes on behind the scenes in these restaurants. Again, it was a lot of fun. He's a really good host, too. I like this. It was, like I said, a very pleasant surprise. Someone else who may not pleasantly surprise you, I don't know. Piers Morgan, and he has a podcast called Piers Morgan Uncensored. He has a lot of different interviews with folks. He's known for being a little bit opinionated at times, but this episode that I checked out was really cool. He was talking to a guy named Graham Hancock that I didn't really know too much about. And I know Graham Hancock has done some research on some of the Egyptian pyramids, and I believe that he knows where the Ark of the Covenant is buried. Snook is a podcast with a lot of different topics, very spooky and mysterious, ghost stories and true crime. And the episode that I checked out was about the CIA's most wanted. Hopescope, I'm presuming that the lady who hosts the show is named Hope. I couldn't see her name anywhere. And she is a professional shopper, and she checks out all those things that you buy online, especially like a lot of beauty products, and gives honest reviews, and she tries all the products out. And she lets you know, what's worth your money and what's not worth your money. So if you like shopping online, check out some of her episodes. There may be some stuff about things that you might be interested in buying or things that you better not buy. Lastly, there was a podcast called Horror Stories. And the episode that I checked out had to do with scary stories involving the police. Now, I had no issue with the stories themselves or anything like that, but I noticed that the narration, I think it was AI because there really wasn't much inflection in the voice, and it kind of got a little monotone after a while, and there really wasn't that emotion in it. So I'm thinking maybe AI. If you want to hear a spooky story, check out I Talk to Ghosts with Jennifer Page or Southern Gothic with Brendan Schexnader. Definitely some spooky stuff there. And both of them have been guests on this podcast, so I can plug them. They're my friends. They'd like me to do that. They're probably saying, thank you, Sherpa, right now. There were a couple of other podcasts that were in the Spotify charts that I really can't talk about because, well, let me explain. One was called Spotify Gaming. That was essentially a award show for video games. It wasn't really a continuing series or anything like that. I guess it was just like a one-off. Rockin Robin are clips from the radio show from this lady, Rockin Robin. I think it's out in California. If I'm not mistaken, I don't really remember. But, the clips are very short, like 30 to 45 seconds. So it's kind of hard to listen and, get some sort of summary out of that. Again, there was another podcast called Memes, and it was kind of the same style. Just a lot of little quick things. But it wasn't really like sort of like an episodic podcast. It was just kind of collections of little chats. So I couldn't really talk about those, but I figured they're worth an honorable mention. Lastly, there are two podcasts, and you'll probably understand why I couldn't really listen to these. One is called Boring History for Sleep, and the other one is called 8-Hour Sleep Music. So I like to listen to podcasts when I'm driving, so I don't want to get a DWS, driving while snoring. So I'm sure you guys don't want that to happen too. They'll lock me up and they'll give me an uncomfortable pillow. But something that won't put you to sleep, because this is a quick episode anyway, it's time for the outro.
It looks like the Sherpa is no longer locked in the bathroom at the Sherpa Chalet, so we can finally get back to the show.
Thanks so much for checking out Sherpa Samples right here on Podcast Picks with Jim, the Podcast Sherpa. We bring you, or try to bring you, new episodes every Wednesday. And on Saturdays, we bring you Sherpa Selects. Those are the episodes from like the first 9 seasons that I really like, and we want to give you the opportunity to hear them again and get them all prettied up so you might enjoy them just a little bit more. You're welcome. I hope you enjoy them. I had a lot of fun doing them as well. And speaking of social media, was I speaking of social media? No. But anyway, you can follow me on Sherpa-lution on Instagram, Threads, TikTok at Sherpa-lution1 with the number 1, and YouTube. And of course, you can listen to this podcast on podcast apps everywhere. But thanks for swinging by and spending a little bit of time with me. We'll be back next week with a new episode, I imagine. We're keeping our fingers crossed for this one, Rebels. And in the meantime, I say to you, Viva la Sherpa-lution!
Thanks for listening to the Sherpa's Podcast Picks. The podcast is now over. Please disperse and tell everyone about us. As long as they don't put us back in jail. Viva la Sherpa-lution!